Okay, hello, hello. All right, clubhouse turn, here we go. Now we're gonna have a panel, and the panel called Straight Talk from the Marketplace. And it's gonna be moderated by Dr. Archelle Georgiou, and I'm gonna read you a couple things, and then I'm gonna pivot to a personal perspective because we have history. Archelle is an experienced director, advisor, speaker, and author. She also happens to be a physician, senior executive and chief medical officer at UnitedHealthcare from '95 to 2007, where during that time she dismantled many of the company's legacy policies. This is important in order to minimize the bureaucratic burdens imposed on patients and on physicians. Since she left UHG, you've probably seen her on TV, but she's also been advising many innovative healthcare companies, over 1,000 new segments. Dear God, woman, over 1,000. She's also co-authored Healthcare Choices, a book to help guide consumers have a voice in their healthcare decisions. Executive in residence at the U of M Carlson School of Management, teaches anatomy and physiology to the MBA students, received her medical, not English or linguistics, medical degree at Johns Hopkins University and practiced medicine in Northern California. Now I pivot to the personal. When I joined United Health Group, I told a story, Richard Anderson was there, and I said, you know, it's always interesting in my experience of observing things to bring in somebody from the outside into a company, because you want a different perspective, but oftentimes I feel the body rejects that appendage. And Richard said to me, yeah, that may be true, but we're hiring a lot of people, and my hope is you people will find each other. At the time, I thought he meant just the new people. What he really meant was the people that were part of that organization at that time that wanted to change healthcare. And when you do that, when you join an organization, you need many mentors. And I'm happy to introduce you to Archelle, who was one of my most important mentors when I made that pivot into healthcare. So Archelle.
Thank you so much. Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to moderate this panel. And what I'd like to do is have our panelists come out. So we have Erin Newkirk. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of Local Crate. Robert Befidi, who leads marketing for 3M's Healthcare Business Group. Jeff Shoemate, the Chief Marketing Officer of Allina. And Brian Peters, the Chief Marketing Officer of Protolabs. So welcome. And I decided to not stand at the podium because I'm so short, I'll get lost behind it, and I'd rather act like a little like Katie Couric or something like that, whatever. And so this is Straight Talk from the Marketplace. We have, of course, 4 experts, 45 minutes of time, so you can read their bios, all highly experienced in marketing. So we're going to cut out a little bit of the bios and get straight to the questions, if that's okay. All right? Great. So Erin, we'll start with you. You built a strong consumer brand with Red Stamp. Then you went to Bright Health, and now you're back at a meal kit company, which I'm really excited to try, called Local Crate. Yes. So given that you've been in the B2C world, B2B world, and back to B2C, how do you define an engaged consumer at an insurance company versus in these, which is B2B, versus these B2C companies?
Sure, that's a great question. You know, for me, an engaged consumer is pretty much any consumer, right, who knows their wants and their needs and is looking for a solution that's going to meet them there. I loved Adrian and Zeus Jones when they talked about a real brand is an entity that doesn't just say. And I feel like most consumers today are looking to brands, to companies to do. And I think the same is true at a B2B company, a B2B2C company, a B2C company. We've made it really complicated, I guess, in the sense that we've identified all of these different audiences. But at the end of the day, it's about doing good things for and with good people.
Great. And Robert, how do you see that same question? So what is an engaged consumer from your perspective at 3M?
So what we find is, the shift from B2B to B2C has changed somewhat in that consumers increasingly have access to a tremendous amount of data. And so we have to do the work that it takes to make sure that they have the information that they need, when they need it, and during their journey and making decisions about their treatment in healthcare.
God, I love your guys' brief answers. You're like TV ready. Jeff, let's move to you. You're currently the Chief Marketing Officer for Allina, but you were previously at UnitedHealth Group's Harken Health. Lots of great things that you guys did. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Harken Health, you merged health insurance coverage with primary care, did really cool things. Your members received free primary care coverage at your clinics, 24/7 phone access to physicians, yoga, acupuncture, mental health counseling, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly, that didn't have, a long life. And we won't talk about why, but I guess my real question is, do you think through your lens and through that experience that consumers are ready to be engaged in their own health and healthcare?
Yeah, I think the Harken Health model, and I would say a lot of care delivery, so Allina Health shares some traits, is trying to find ways to help consumers find engagement in their healthcare, right? So, I think Erin's definition around people who know that they have needs or know what their needs are is the right place to start. And so if consumers are coming to any healthcare product or service, it helps a ton if they see the need themselves or feel the need themselves. I think the next level of engagement is them engaging in the solution that you're providing, that they see the value in that. And I think that, to your question, the answer is for some consumers, they are ready, and for some, they're not. And I think the challenge for any of us who are working in this space is to identify the consumers who are already there and then find ways to create engagement for the consumers who aren't there, right? And that's, we've been hearing a lot about technology solutions and big data and other things in this space. One of the things that's common among the Harken experience in Allina Health is that there's a real human element there too for consumers, and getting the right mix of the technology and sort of the modern techniques and real human interaction to help them find their engagement or their needs, I think is an important balance to strike.
Great, thanks. And then, Brian, you're from outside healthcare. So you can pipe in with your healthcare opinion or your non-healthcare opinion. But so Brian Peters is the Chief Marketing Officer at Protolabs, and they're a digital manufacturing source for rapid prototyping. But before that, not that that's not interesting enough, but before that, you were the Chief Marketing Officer of Cambria. And my understanding is that you were really central to bringing augmented reality to your users, your customer base, and driving consumer engagement. So AR, VR is potentially such a big technology in healthcare. I guess I want to ask you, let's start with, how did AR drive consumer engagement at Cambria, non-healthcare, and then how do you see it driving consumer engagement in healthcare?
Yeah, good. So I've always been fascinated by technology. That the catalyst for my time when I was at Cambria was when Apple sort of brought AR into their operating system, right? Before that, it was still something that was kind of a little out of reach, I think, for consumers. When Apple made that decision about a little over a year ago, we jumped on that opportunity because we knew it would be fairly mainstream, at least from an Apple perspective. Reason being, at least in the business I was in, the model was, if you've ever picked out carpet, countertops, all that great stuff, you went to a store, you got these really, quite frankly, heavy samples. If you were getting our countertops or carpet, you brought them home, you tried to envision what a square foot looks like. And what the augmented reality capability did is we built into the phone the ability for you to hold up your phone within your very own kitchen, your living room, wherever it was, and then choose a design that you'd like to bring in, and it would immediately change what that view looks like, right? So you could see your entire kitchen, quite frankly, with a new countertop on it while you were up close moving around. That experience, we got immediate feedback, was remarkable for the consumer because it took some of the pain points out of the more traditional way of doing that. So that was what was an accelerant there, and how we used AR, really, Apple's augmented reality. What I noticed in that is the consumer, it was very easy to do. They were very engaged in it. Of course, you had to be in the marketplace for that. It will be interesting as we get into healthcare and how we can bring that technology into healthcare. I think you got to start with what pain point am I solving for a consumer or customer of healthcare. If you start there, the adoption rate's likely to be higher. I would just spend the time there, focusing on where that technology could add value.
And I don't know if you are looking at what healthcare companies have implemented AR, but do you have visibility to any companies that have put it in place? Or
I don't within the healthcare industry. I know there are many other companies, IKEA, Home Depot. I mean, there were a lot of other companies in our industry that were jumping on board. There's a lot of apps in the App Store now for both Android and iPhone using the technology. So I've seen it being built across industries. Within healthcare, I haven't spent enough time diving deep into its usage there.
Jeff, are you using that in Allina in any way?
Yeah, I think probably not in the way that is being described. I think if you go deep into the clinical space, they're using a lot of technology enhancements to actually do work on patients, but I'm not sure in the way we're describing here.
Okay, and then Robert?
Yeah, so we have customers. So as a manufacturer, we enable our partners both on the provider side and the clinical side to service their customers, right? So we have customers outside of the U.S. and some in the U.S. who are, as part of patient preparation for surgery, for example, who put out virtual reality modules for those patients so they can experience the day before they come into practice. And we contribute to that experience for the customer by providing content that is delivered on virtual reality glasses and things of that nature. So they know how to interact with the product, they understand what the benefits are for the product, and their experience is enhanced through our services, but helping really our partners deliver better experiences for their customers.
So for any of you that recently saw a National Geographic story about the young woman who got a face transplant, a lot of the preoperative planning for her, and many other surgeries, but that one in particular is available for you to see, used a lot of virtual reality, augmented reality for the preoperative planning to understand what it would take to do this, 18-hour surgery. And so it doesn't even need to be that extensive. Surgeons and other types of providers can use AR so that they're not figuring out what to do when they're inside of a person, but they can understand what they need to do ahead of time and really have better planning.
We are not using augmented reality at local crates.
So we can't see what our meals are
No. No. Well, you can go to our website and look at it.
That's great. So let's switch to the topic of, instead of augmented reality, let's talk about artificial intelligence. Let's talk about that. And actually, let's just start with you. Are you using any of that now, or did you see any AI being used in starting up Bright Health?
Absolutely. So, Local Crate, our mission is about decentralizing the food system and bringing reality to the table, literally the kitchen table. So I think what's important and where that comes into play, right, is, and Andy Slavitt said it really well earlier, when you think about healthcare, right, it's less about the political system and more about what happens at the kitchen table. And I think that AI, AR, and all of those tools are really important to get us there. So I'm definitely not laughing about the use of them in healthcare. I think it's really, really important. I think that what we like to do, however you can engage with your consumers and figure out what their needs and wants are, how to build around that, and then how to communicate with them are really, really important. And I love that in the world of healthcare, and we did some of this at Bright Health, and I know that the work is continuing there, is it really is about trying to identify what the needs and wants are at scale. And AI can really do that well, especially at a first pass.
So within the healthcare business at 3M, we have a healthcare IT business, we do a tremendous amount of machine learning, natural language processing when we look at patient risk stratification, patient classification, reimbursement modeling, things of that nature on the clinical side. On the business side, when you think about marketing and the explosion of data that's available to us in marketing, there's also opportunity to look at, whether it's supervised learning or unsupervised learning, as you think about how you segment your customers and potential customers in ways that help you to direct the resources to the right place to provide services. So there's definitely a lot of applications of AI, both within our solutions to the practitioners and the patients, but also in how we run our business on the marketing side.
So Jeff, feel free to comment on how you use AI at Allina, but what I really want to ask you is, how do you avoid what everybody keeps referring to as like the creepiness factor? I've heard that term so many times in the last several weeks, I can't help but use it. So absolutely, AI can drive personalization and it has so many potential advantages, but it is possible to cross over a line. And how, so you can answer both questions, but please answer the second as well.
I'll start with the AI and segmentation or targeting more generally. So delivery, healthcare delivery is relatively late to the game of branding and targeting and marketing. Allina is no different. And part of that is that we tend to look at our consumers transactionally, like this person has come into the office for something. Maybe it's routine, maybe they've got a cancer diagnosis, and so what we're trying to get to is think about them over the continuum of care and remain in contact with them over a continuum. We're not particularly good yet at sort of maintaining that conversation. I joke that I get better communication from my vet about my dog than I do from my doctor about me over time. And so we're trying to get better at that, and I think techniques like AI and like more robust segmentation and anticipating things is going to put us in a much better position to sort of develop a relationship and actually help consumers stay healthy as opposed to just being there when they're sick. I think the creepiness factor comes in when we're asking them to give us data and it's not clear why we want it, or we are somehow out of tune in terms of reaching out to them about something that that feels unnatural, right? So I think that's probably one of the problem spots along a journey to being really relevant and sort of engaged with consumers. And I think the trick is to really be delivering as much value as you can so that they're happy to give you their data, right? We have relationships in our lives today like that. If you use Amazon, they have a huge amount of data from you, and generally speaking, you're happy to have them have it because they're creating so much value in your life. So I think for delivery, we're sort of behind the curve in terms of a lot of industries, but that's where we need to go, and it's a really rich place for us and for new techniques and inventions to help us build those relationships.
Brian, any comments on AI in your world and what we can learn from you?
Yeah, I think both AI and the creepiness, quite frankly, they're related very closely. From an AI perspective, we're an e-commerce-based digital manufacturer, so there's a couple places where we deploy it through different marketing technologies. One is on the pricing, because every part that comes to us is custom. It's not an off-the-shelf part. You're literally reading millions of, over the years, different prices and price points, and we need machine learning to sort of help digest, where we're under and over sort of what the market would be on the custom side. The other place is in marketing, and if I think of sort of pre-AI or marketing, tech marketing, you often try to segment your customers into a couple of groups, right? This is a business travel on an airline, this is a leisure traveler, and then you'd market to those audiences and you'd have a handful. Theory being in AI, which there's truth to that theory, is everybody can be individualized. So instead of having big sets that you go to market to, we have 30,000 plus different product developers we work with. They're all individuals, and if we deploy AI and use AI effectively, we're going to be able to create a more customized experience for them as an individual versus putting them in a set and treating them as one. So I think it'll actually, if we deploy it the right way, just as an industry, be beneficial. to the experience, which leads into the creepiness part. And so we take it pretty seriously because we look at a lot of IP from pre-revenue products that's very, very secretive and not to be shared. And of course, that tells us exactly what they're doing and how they'd use it. But that information we believe is proprietary to them, and we shouldn't use it. So we're pretty basic in terms of, what industry are they in, what's their name, what's their order history, which is all well known. And certainly we try to be helpful and make suggestions as to other interests they may have. But we believe in stopping short of going too far so as not to create an experience where you can be quickly alienated, I think, as a brand if you lean into that too far. And if we all do that too much, you're going to see the government, as you're seeing in Europe right now and a little bit in California, continue to come in and start to regulate what marketers can and can't do, and we're already starting to see that.
So I was in a conversation and moderating a panel last week where we were talking about this issue, this creepiness factor, and one of the suggestions that one of the panelists had was to avoid the creepiness factor, then you need to be transparent. What data are you collecting, and why, and how are you using it, and how do the algorithms work? And so, but on the other side of that, these algorithms are what are proprietary and give you a strategic advantage in your business. So how do you balance that? How do you balance offering the transparency that you need to drive towards trust, which I want to touch on in a moment, but balancing that with maintaining your strategic advantage? Anybody have any comments?
Well, I think as it relates to the business side of the equation, there's a lot of clarity around what we're collecting, what we're doing with it, and for what purpose, right? When it comes to marketing, we have to keep in mind that we're still in healthcare, and so there's a different set of regulatory considerations that we have to have, and so we haven't really ventured into the creepiness factor yet with our healthcare business, simply for that reason. We're a lot more deliberate and thoughtful, and we recognize that although there's consumerization of healthcare, a lot of the decision making is still very much influenced by the professionals in healthcare, and those are very discrete conversations that are taking place, very deliberate.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think in delivery, we're actually at the other end of the spectrum where we are not erring on the side of we know so much that we're doing things that creep you out. We're at we annoy you because we ask you for the same information over and over again, right? So I think I'd go back to the principles. As we start to leverage that information, I think transparency is one great way to make sure that it doesn't feel creepy. If you can do that, there are some regulations that we have to figure out how to navigate as we leverage that more and more. And then I'll take it all the way back to your first question around, are they ready? I think they are absolutely ready. Consumers are absolutely ready for better service. We have this interesting paradox, at least in care delivery, where the science and the medicine has gotten so much better over the years, right? Like there are miracles happening every day in hospitals based on technology from manufacturers and other things. And yet at the same time, people are generally dissatisfied, right? And they're mostly dissatisfied on the complexity that has come in and the cost has come in and the service levels that are way behind where they could be. And so, this is an area where I think we have a lot of opportunity to get much better, not just on the cures, but on the experience.
So what's the biggest barrier to establishing your brand? We can talk a lot about what you have to do, but what is getting in the way? Erin, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, this conversation so far, when you think about consumers, consumerization, healthcare, technology, right? I think it's really important to separate out the who, the what, just the basic questions of what it is that we're trying to do, right? What it is we're trying to do from a provider perspective, what we're trying to do from a payer perspective, Even what we're trying to do in businesses where we feel like, food is one of the biggest sources of medicine, and not only from a physical sense, but also from a mental health sense and a spiritual sense, right? Because that's how we think about medicine and healthcare at Local Crate. It really is about community. So you think about all of these tools, right? So separating out everything we've been talking about right now, but then you take it back into what the intent is. Match that with integrity, capabilities, and results. And I think if you can prove and build trust, trust is something, right, that's really, really hearty and something that we should dig into. And I think it's something that's really lacking right now in the healthcare system. And I think a lot of it is because we haven't demonstrated the intent and the integrity. We can show capabilities around AR and virtual reality and, AI, but if it doesn't start with intent and isn't met with integrity and proven results, then I think we're just kind of spinning our wheels a little bit.
Other thoughts? Barriers to establishing that strong brand in healthcare.
Overall, just having worked on many brands over my career, that is the race, right? If you're a marketer, how do you establish the brand? That's sort of the ultimate question. There's a lot of, as of late, there are a lot of trends in the last group we talked about, being purpose-driven, transparency. You have to sort of set up those guidelines and those principles. It's in some ways it's almost like a giant political race. You're trying to jockey and break through and aim for positioning. You're starting to see brands, quite frankly, take positions that 20 years ago you would have never seen a brand support this or do this, but that's sort of demanded by consumers and customers now. Where do you stand on an issue that would have been, quite frankly, a human issue that we would have never put on a brand's shoulders before? We now do that. So it's much more complex to launch and establish a brand today than what it was 20 years ago. It's much more complicated, but purpose-driven, lead with transparency, be clear on what you're trying to achieve for that brand is I think critical to have the right foundation there. And then it's hopefully a lot of great marketing and a lot of smart folks making good decisions.
Yeah, I just build and talk, I think this is good general wisdom on branding. I'll just hit the delivery thing again, or the provider thing again, that again, I think care delivery is late to the game. The science of it and the care of it, the clinical care of it is fantastic, but consumers' expectations are rising all around us, right? So back to the Amazon example, or pick a service industry that is gone digital and using AI and really meeting people where they are. Those are the expectations that people apply to the visit to the doctor's office, the fill out your form again, even though you visited last week, right? And so it goes back to, for us, how do we build the right value proposition and actually deliver it, right? And find a way to differentiate based on what we can do, back to the do-say thing, before we overpromise on the advertising or the marketing or whatever it is. So it's exciting times because it's the expectations are pretty low, but the opportunity is fantastic to build into an experience that helps people engage more in their health.
So I just want to drive to a point, but tell me whether you agree or disagree. What I'm hearing is that the product, the delivery of healthcare, needs to get fixed before you can really successfully develop a brand. Did I hear that correctly?
So, one thing that's interesting is we're all talking, and I think, especially like Jeff and I have worked in consumer packaged goods in that area. So I think we're both classically trained marketers in that way. I can speak to our experience. But I think marketing in healthcare, at least one thing that was really shocking to me when I entered, was that it was a lot about brochures and communication, and it was less about starting where marketing really should start, which is identifying needs and wants, understanding what that is so you can build it into an amazing product, however you define that product. And I think in healthcare now, the product is everything from delivery of care to the website that you log into to make your appointment, or app, or whatever you're using. And so it's the needs and wants, consumer-driven, not necessarily consumer-led, but really what the needs and wants are of the constituents and the people we serve, translating that into a really strong product, and then talking about it. And I think that you can't just jump to the talking about it without having the stuff, and that's understanding what it is that people need and want from you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so if I think about 3M with our heritage of innovation, right, we have amazing products. And we have amazing stories about those products that were, for a long time, geared towards professional users, physicians, dentists, orthodontists. What we're doing now is we're spending a lot of time telling stories that convey the human-centered element of it that a consumer wants to hear. So not so much about how good the dressing is from a functional or clinical economic standpoint, but what it does for the need of that customer at that point in time in their care. And as more and more of the consumers are really taking their content from a digital perspective, we're spending a tremendous amount of time driving velocity and scale in how quickly we get that content to them globally on that medium, which was not the case before. It was the brochures and the white papers and things like that.
So from your perspectives as CMOs at your respective companies, do you think that marketing leaders have enough of a seat at the table to influence the product, to influence the price? Or is it all handed it to you and like, go build this brand? I mean, do you think you need a bigger seat at the table?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
At our company we do, but we certainly have opportunity for having more resources to do it.
Okay. Jeff, what do you think?
I'd never say no to more resources.
I'm saying more of a seat at the table. I mean, do you feel like you influence how care is delivered, and do you have enough of a voice to do that?
Yeah, I mean, so Allina Health is, this is the CMO role there is a new role, and it exists because I think a lot of what I've been talking about was recognized by the company, that delivery, again, is fantastic on the medicine, but that is not good enough going forward. And a system like Allina that delivers everything from flu shots to curing cancer needs to think differently in some of the ways that I'm describing. And so the fact that my position exists, I think, is evidence that they're looking for that input. And I don't think that they're alone. I think the delivery systems across the country are moving into this space because they feel like they need to. And so, do I have enough of a voice? Not enough of a voice. There is certainly energy and interest. Witness this conference in consumerism coming into the space. And figuring it out then is the trick, right?
Brian?
Yeah. I'll be the outlier here. I'm lucky enough at Protolabs, we actually have, I'm responsible for both product and the marketing side. So the services we bring to market, and then of course the marketing for it. Two different groups, but all within my organization. I can tell you there's been a lot of benefits because I've marketed the other way around as well. And there's not a lot of room for excuses because you're the ones that brought the product to market, and then you're the ones that go market it. So who else do we come after when it doesn't go well? But the person who brought it to market and then was supposed to drive demand for it. But it's great because in the middle of both of those is a customer or a consumer, and you get really close when you're both working on the product side of what is needed in the marketplace, and then the demand generation side of it. And so I may be a beneficiary in that example. But it's helped me be both, and I think Protolabs as a company be very, very smart as we go to market, having those two combined, both from a development and a demand generation standpoint.
So I'd like to pivot a little bit more. So in consumer products, when you build a great brand, you sell a lot of product. And that metric, I'm sure that they go together, even though that's certainly not my expertise. In healthcare, there's a paradox. Like, you want to build a great brand, and especially in healthcare services, but you don't want them to use it too much because that's not good for people, it's not good for healthcare costs, it's not good for society, all of those things. How do you balance the requirement and, you're accountable to building a great brand, but at the same time, you can't oversell its features or over-suggest that people use those services, because of all of the other dynamics, the unique dynamics in healthcare. Any comments on that? How do you balance those? Love us, but not too much. Yes.
No, I mean, actually, that's an excellent point, right? Because there's a lot of value in making sure that you have the right utilization, and for all consumers, right, and all users of that product. Wherever you sit in the chain of healthcare. But the way that we used to talk about it a lot at Bright was it was really around that whole volume to value proposition, right? And the fact that you can provide value earlier on so that it doesn't get to the point of triage where people are then faced with really expensive and really gut-wrenching interfaces with medicine, So I think it is about engagement. It is about providing value. I think it depends on where you're providing the value, though. In prevention, that's where ideally you're staying, because then it's, everyone wins with that.
Robert?
I don't know that we necessarily think about the branding side as being exclusive from the usage of the product, because a lot of the innovation that we bring to market is transforming lives in some form or another. And so to the extent we're able to, whether it's in the US or any other country in the world, to get those products to benefit the patients, we want to see that happen as cost effective as possible for those health systems.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I'd look at it is, and this is again maybe unique to delivery, is that we would love them to come in for their flu shot so they can avoid the hospitalization, right? Yeah. But we're there if they need the hospitalization. And so this actually goes back to the point about AI and segmentation and the communication. You'd love to get good enough where you are managing the population that you have relationship with proactively to reduce the cost, right? Allina happens to be a not-for-profit, and so we have a mission that isn't necessarily about purely maximizing revenue and profit, but about caring for the community and finding that right balance, right? And we just need to get good enough to be able to do that.
So, how do you know when you've successfully built a brand? Like, what's the metric? When can you check it off the list? And certainly always maintain it. But let's start at the far end of the table.
Another good evergreen marketing question. You'll get 100 answers, at least 4, probably different ones today, but that's the point. I can tell you over the years what I've reflected on, and I've always looked for engagement beyond the transaction, right? So every company and business has, you bought something from me, you used my service, we have lots of customers. But when you're doing something good, unique, different, when you see engagement in the brand, in the company that's beyond the transaction. And so I've always typically looked for that. Obviously, there's a whole suite of things you can see in social media, but even if they call you on your 800 number and give you advice, right? If they tell a friend or a neighbor, about you, there's lots of different types of engagement, but I've always looked for that to be increasing on a regular basis. Are more and more people engaged with my brand beyond just the black and white transaction piece of things. And if you're seeing that as a marketer, I think you're seeing that what you're doing is building traction with your customer base.
How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's right. There you go. There's only one answer. My build would be that maybe a simple version is that, if something comes up in their health, that they assume Allina Health does it, even if we don't, right? Like, we are the go-to place for all things health. I think you've essentially arrived at that point.
So market share in your case?
Market share and top of mind. And if somebody asked me where they could get XYZ thing in the general health space, that I'd say, well, I'm not sure, but I bet Allina does it, right? I think that's the impression.
Okay. Robert?
When I think beyond our sort of big 3M brand, what we've seen is advocacy, right? For some of the brands in our portfolio, you get a tremendous amount of advocacy, and you get at the patient level, you get it at the physician level, you get it at the nurse level. We've had cases where the administrator for the facility made a change in solutions, and their nurses and doctors would still call us, even though they weren't using our products anymore. You know, that's when you know you've made it, when the brand is that strong and they look forward to the next cycle when you come back in. You know, it's pretty impressive.
Erin?
Yeah, I mean, these are excellent examples, you guys. I mean, I think engagement, advocacy, trust, all of those pieces are really important. And so I'm going to take it a different direction because I agree with all of those things. I was just at a different conference yesterday for Startup Week, and someone came up to me and was talking about Local Crate. And literally I got a little choked up because the story she had was, you know, my daughter's boyfriend is a little socially awkward, and we've been trying to find a way that we could get together and really communicate because we have really stilted conversations. And she said, we went to the store, bought one of the meal kits on shelf, and we came home and we made it together. And I found out more about him than I found out in the last 9 months about him. And she was like, you know, it was a less contrived game, right? She's like, you could sit down, we could have said, let's play Scrabble or let's do this. And it would have been like, hey, let's get to know each other in a less awkward way. But instead it was like, let's make dinner together. And I think when you hear those stories and you know that you are improving people's lives, however you're doing it, you know, micro moments, macro moments, across the board, I think that's when you know that you've created something that's really special.
That's a great story.
Yeah,
that's a great story. And in our final round of questions, what role does social media play in establishing this brand, in driving engagement beyond the transaction, in understanding when there is advocacy? Anybody can start, but I'd love to hear all of your points of view.
You want me to start?
Go for it.
Okay. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but that's pretty par for the course. You know, I think social media is an amazing tool. I think even when you peel back what social has done for us, right, the whole definition of social is that it comes from the bottom up. So people are able to hear unfiltered stories, and in a lot of cases filtered. But I would say actually in brands, what you see is a lot less filtered because it's people being really honest. Whether they love something or they hate it, you're going to hear about it. So I think as a brand, it's a really unique opportunity to monitor, watch, engage where you can. I think people use it everything from customer service to, you know, positive praise to negative, you know, voicing of concerns. But I love, actually, from a brand perspective, the unfiltered communication that can come from people on a mass scale.
Others?
I agree with a lot of what Erin said. I think, you know, as we look at that medium, it gives us an opportunity to hear things we normally wouldn't hear, and then in some cases that influences what we do next. But in other cases, it helps us get a view, especially with a firm like ours where we're multinational and we have to think about things from all parts of the world because they do travel fast and influence things in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess my builds are, you know, it's really, we're looking at purchase path and how do people decide how they get care, who they get care from, doctor ratings, you know, official ratings, unofficial ratings, you know, women trying to decide what OB to choose. They put it out on Nextdoor, right? So it's a challenge for us to figure out how do we be in the right place at the right time to both understand it, but also be there with answers. It's a place that I feel like we are constantly behind the curve in terms of investment and presence, and so it's a big deal. I guess the other thing is, versus being international, we are very local, and healthcare is a very local thing, and so that's another sort of advantage in terms of picking up the level of granularity that is different in New Ulm, Minnesota versus you know, downtown Minneapolis. It's a great asset and a great challenge.
Brian?
Yeah, I would, again, in addition to some of the commentary, which I agree with, it's certainly great from an amplification of your message, your marketing, what you're trying to do. You have to be obviously present in social and make sure you have shareable content out there. I also find it to be very, very helpful, both from a product and service standpoint, to get pretty quick feedback on, hey, you know, we published something on this new metal 3D printing capability. It got shared at 4 times the rate, you know, our last 20 posts did. Okay, let's hang on to that marketing. There's an audience there for that. You know, where do we amplify it? What else do we need to look at in 3D printing? So I think it's as much amplification of the marketing and conversation, quite frankly, with your customer, your consumer that you should be having, as much as it is an always-on learning tool that is giving you real-time feedback as a product leader or marketer, which is very, I think, useful for companies.
Well, we are at the 45-minute mark, so I'm going to wrap it up and just sort of summarize by saying that, as you know, this panel was called the whole session was called the Consumerization of Healthcare, and as I hear you speak, it reminds me that the marketers in healthcare companies are probably those who are most capable of helping healthcare understand how to personalize and how to get people the care and services that they're really hoping for, that so many other industries are able to offer us. So I do hope that you have an even greater voice at the table, and that all of you remember how important a voice it is for people with your expertise, because at its core, it's all about the people first, and that's what your training and your expertise brings to us. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I want to let you know that this is the last session. We're going to give people a little bit of time back in your day, and a little bit later at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock in the main exhibit center. There's going to be a preview of day 3. So we'll adjourn from this session for today. Thank you so much for coming. And then if you're staying for a little bit later, then you can go to preview day 3 in the larger exhibit hall. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.